In this video we're going to have a look at this landscape. We're going to be doing it in some gouache, and it's more of a gouache sketch, color sketch, just to have a look and see, to block colors, create bits of interest, and then see if this is a composition we might want to take to a bigger painting. And what we have is a road coming down the middle. So we have our road over here, we have a fence over here that helps with perspective, leaning into the center of this road over here, so it disappears somewhere here. And then we have some trees. It might be a town, it could just be a forest. There's something there. And then on the top of the hill here we have a big tree, and there might be a farmhouse there. And this is the pathway, not really a road, more of a sandy path that heads all the way down. Then we have some hills, and then we have some clouds, and then some blue sky at the top. So what I'm going to do to get started, I'm going to take this bigger brush, and we're just going to look at some light blue in the background for the clouds. And I'm actually using, for the clouds, I'm using Blue Lake. So you'll see this is on recycled paper. So the behavior of the paint might be a little bit different to what you might be used to. So you'll see how we're getting all these funny kind of textures in. The paint is opaque, and that just pretty much means that we can layer and come over it again later if we want to with another color. So I'm just going over the edge of the clouds there. And then what I'm also going to do is just put a little bit of blue here in the bottom. Right, so we want to finish the clouds up ideally. Right, so I'm now going to add a bit of white, and for this exercise I'm actually using acrylic white because I don't have any gouache white left. So I'm just going to mix up a little bit of white, but it behaves in the same way. It's also water based, and the gouache and the acrylics are good friends, so they play nicely together. So we're just going to do this cloud over here, and for the cloud we just need some white. And right, so this is where the clouds will come in, and we do want to make it a little bit of a feature of the sky. So right, so there we have some clouds coming in, and then of course at the base the clouds are very flat, so that's why I'm going to do the brush in a very horizontal way. There we have some of that, and then here I'm just going to, and you'll see that I'm just keeping it quite loose and quite rough. So there's our cloud formation, and we'll come back a little bit later. We're just blocking that in now. So that's the cloud, and now what we're going to do is just work on this background here. So to create that nice background, we're going to use a bit of white to push back the color. White is a great color for pushing back color. And what I'm also going to do now is use some of this ultramarine, and I'm going to use some crimson, and that's going to create this kind of purple. And then what we're going to do is use the white to then just push that back. And I'm going to be using a smaller flat brush to do that. So we're just mixing this up here, and then we're going to add some white, and we want to keep it pretty light. We don't want to make it too dark, it'll overwhelm the foreground then. So maybe just a bit of water there. So now the further something is away, the less the flatter it'll appear, just because we can't see the detail that's there. So if we want to push this back really far, then we make it nice and light with lots of white. And if you want to bring it forward, we'll make it a little bit darker, and then it goes from that purple haze or bluish haze in the background. We'll start to bring in more identifiable colors, like maybe some browns, some greens, for rocks and stuff. So there we have the color slowly pushing back. Going to add a bit more white with that. Right, so we're putting in a bit more white, and you'll see now that when I do that, it's pushing everything right back, and because it's quite flat. Anyway, I quite like the effect that we're getting there. So, right, so there we have our kind of background with the hills in the background, and I'm just going to, so it's quite a light sunny picture. And then of course coming closer, we're going to mix it up a bit here. So I've got some yellow ochre here, and I want to just do that for the hills that are a bit closer. I'm going to mix that yellow ochre with the ultramarine blue. And I haven't cleaned my brush, so I've still got the background on here and the purple, and I'm mixing that with some of the ultramarine and the medium yellow. And you'll see here now that the kind of just introducing a little bit of an interesting piece of geography here, which is kind of a little bit closer than the background hill. So it looks like we have some hills closer by. Then we're going to have the town, whatever happens over here. On the right here where the fence is, we're also going to have a tree on the hill. So what I'm going to do is just carry on with my interesting background piece, and you'll see now I'm going to introduce some more color with the ultramarine, and just, you know, I'm not painting anything specific, I'm just putting down the color, and to keep it interesting I'm just kind of mixing it up. And then I'm going to take some white, and that's just going to, we're just going to push that color back a bit there, maybe on that side. So yeah, there we have some interesting shapes and stuff happening. We're not sure what they are, but that's just part of the hills. And now what we do is we're now ready to do some of the foreground. So to bring the color closer, we're going to use some warmer colors. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a little bit of crimson. So we've already got some crimson down. And instead of the yellow ochre now, I'm going to change my yellow to the medium yellow. So we had the yellow ochre for that kind of background hill there. Now I'm going to bring in some medium yellow, and I'm just going to mix it in with what we had before and some white. And then I'm going to create this over here. So you'll see here that the yellow is a very, you know, we're still looking at a pretty cool color, still very yellow, very blue, and we're going to liven that up now. So here we have our hill coming in, this of course leading onto this pathway. So now if we have the sun coming from the left hand side, then of course we need to show that the light is coming from the left, and I don't want to have this path ending straight in the corner here, so I'm going to bring it over a bit. And like I said, we're just blocking in at the moment, so we'll go over this again. I'm going to introduce some darker greens here. So right, so there we have our hill coming in here on the right hand side. So let's mix up some more of that. And you'll see I'm going a little bit darker here in the foreground. So I've added just a little bit of crimson to my mix to get that slightly warmer, darker color. And then what we want to do is create the impression that the hill slopes up on the right. So I'm just going to move my brush stroke now in the direction that I want it to move in. That will kind of help to create that. And then also I'm kind of going back to a bit of the yellow ochre in the background there. Right, so there we have our hill sloping up at the back, and then we're going to have the fence running across. So I just want to get my hill right, and what I'm going to do just to also create a bit of interest and accentuate the slope then is just a bit of a highlight here. And the highlight quite important now, because we're going to use that to create the impression that the hill slopes up to the right. So you'll see now that I'm just moving my brush stroke in that direction, and already you can see that the hill is moving away from us towards this top area. I'm just going to give that a bit more here, and then I'm going to be a little bit sneaky here with some red, and right here in the front I've actually introduced some crimson into my mix, and that's really just to, you know, bring this area a bit forward. So there you can see. Right, so there's our hill moving away to the right hand side, and right on the top of that hill we're just going to put on some medium yellow and a little bit of white, and I'm still using the brush with all the colors on, still not cleaning, because I want to capture all that color. And then right at the top of the hill we have this. Right, so that's that side of the hill. Let's head on back here. So this is going to be more shadow because the sun coming from the left hand side. And so what I'm doing here now is I'm just you'll see we're also using the brush to indicate the direction of the slope, but now instead of using the highlights we're using the lowlights. So there we're using the darker color then to show the slope. So there we have the light coming in from the left, and then what I'm going to do is just a touch of that lemon yellow at the top, and then I'm going to add a little bit of white, and that's just going to highlight the fact that there is a little bit of sunshine, just, you know, kind of along the top of that there. So there's our sunshine. And then what I'm also going to do now is with that lemon yellow is also just do, and you'll see I kind of rotate my brush as I go, and that's just to roll the paint off nicely when I move. So right, so we're just once again playing with the highlights here, and we're just creating the impression. So there we have the hill up onto the right hand side. We're going to put a little town and some trees along there, and then the idea was to put a fence here, but I'm not sure if that fence is going to be needed. So I'm just going to, right, now I'm going to clean my brush. The reason I'm going to clean it now is because I want to do something with this pathway, and the pathway is not going to be like a road which is strictly flat. You'll see that the hill comes in, and then we have this road, and there's slightly up on the right, and it comes down on the left. So there'll be a little bit of shadow coming in from the left hand side there on the road. So here we go. And for this, I think what we're going to do, I'm using some burnt umber and some yellow ochre, and I might pull in some crimson and some ultramarine for the lighter areas. So let's see, we're just mixing that up nicely. Right, then now the road is going to be this uneven path, so I'm going to paint it uneven from the beginning, and yeah, you'll see, and I'm kind of, you know, a bit of a dryish brush here. Then I'm going to bring in some of that crimson with the burnt umber here in the front. So there you can see here in the front we've gone with the warmer colors, and on top of that now we're going to add some, and then towards the right of the picture we have more of the yellow ochre. So the light does hit it a little bit on the road, something like that, and then we just need some French ultramarine, or ultramarine should I say. This is not the French one, and we're just gonna, and we also we just want to integrate a bit with the edge. We don't want that straight line, so I'm actually moving into the green, and I'm not shy, we just go in and break it up. So now we have this road, there's a bit of shadow here and it's a bit lighter on that side. So to accentuate that, I'm gonna just add a bit of white here to this side of the path, and right, so there you can see maybe a little bit of red, because this is getting a bit closer, and I'm just using ultramarine. And then over here we have these, and we just wanted to create this idea that it was a little bit lighter. So that's kind of the path developing, and now I'm going to clean my brush. And now what I want to do is just have a look at putting in some trees and stuff on that horizon line, and then some houses and things, just to show that there's signs of life. And to do that, we're going to go back to our French, or not our French, just ultramarine, and we're going to mix that in with the medium yellow and the yellow ochre, and we're just going to create this kind of greenish color. And then what I'm going to do is just bring that over. Now it is quite far away, so if it's, you know, the ultramarine will help to, you know, push that green back. So here we're going with our trees, and you'll see definitely pushing back there. So, and this paper is, so I'm just doing that tree line, and no particular pattern, just trying to cover those white spots there as much as possible. So you'll see, yeah, so we're just creating the impression. Now because this is textured paper, it leaves a lot of white gaps, so we want to get rid of those. What I also want to do now is just start you know, working on maybe the highlights of the trees. So what I'm going to do is look for a different brush, a smaller kind of flattish brush, so that we can apply that. Let's have a look at my collection. But it looks like we're going to go with this one, and a little bit of white. So it's a fairly largish kind of brush, and I'm just going to be touching the tops of the trees. So I'm going to move my mix to my white. And then we're just going to, you know, create some interesting tree bits. Right, and now what we need to do is head over to the medium yellow. And then we're just going to make those trees pop a bit. So a bit of medium yellow, a little bit of white, and then we apply that on top of what we have, and you'll see now that we're creating this very happy, sunny tree. And then what we're going to do, just to make that really pop a bit, is we're going to take some French ultramarine and we're just going to lay down, you know, something a little bit darker there, and that's going to come. All right, so you'll see that by, you know, building up these layers of lights and darks, you can then create this interesting tree line. And don't be scared. What I'm going to do here is actually, I want to break that line a bit, so I'm going to bring some of that forward. And even over here, instead of having that very rigid line at the end, I'm also just going to come forward a bit like that, and then what we'll do is we'll just make it look like a couple of trees coming forward. Right, so there we have something of something developing there. And you'll see that by using a lot of color, different colors, it makes it more interesting than if we just had, you know, like one color and then a flat color on top of that. So by mixing up the lights, the darks, the highlights, we start to create this interesting forest. And now we have this interesting something happening. We can bring it over. Right, so now we have this very interesting space developing here. And it's really great because it'll just make the painting more interesting when people look at it. And although it's no definable shape, it's just really cool to look at. So and it's not really about what it is, it's just that it's there. Sometimes it's the stuff that people don't notice. Okay, so there we have this bit of a forest developing there, and what I'm going to do then, just to finish that off, is I'm just going to add some dark, and you'll see now why we do that. And you'll see now that by adding little bits of dark, we're actually just making that even more interesting. Right, so there we have our little area coming on there. Okay, so now what we need to do is finish off this road, and you can see now that with the advent of the bushes, maybe our grass is not so smooth as you see it now on the left and the right hand side of the road. So we do want to roughen that up and start to make it look like grass. So I'm going to head over onto the left hand side first, and what we're going to do now is just with our brush we'll just start making some interesting marks, and just really to represent some kind of something, and we're not too sure what. So remember, we just want to create the impression. We're just blocking in, we're not going into too much detail. So there we have something happening on that side of the road, and then of course that translates into some kind of shadow. So I'm just going to, with the same kind of, almost with the same colors, I'm going to bring that across, right? And then on the right hand side we're going to do the same thing, but we'll just add more highlight so that it's a little bit brighter. So that's what we're doing here now, and you'll see that I'm just applying my brush quite rough, a bit more red, and you'll see here just a bit more, just a little bit rougher, not taking too much care about what we do. We just want to create these areas of interest, so little bits of highlight coming in, and of course and then on the road. So there we have the road, and then of course at the base even of the highlighted area you do want to have some dark, and then remember that as you get away from the detail, things get flatter. So as you go up this hill, the colors get flatter and flatter. So on the left hand side we have this kind of green thing happening, and on the right hand side we have more of a curated field. And you'll see here that as you paint, if you're just painting to have fun, you'll see that things will happen, these happy accidents will happen, and you can then of course adjust them to your picture, which is what I'm doing here. So it's almost like we have this foreground here, and then we have this in the background, and here we have some stuff happening here as well, and we don't want solid line. And then what I'm going to do is just add some more highlight to my hill, and I'm also going to change my style a bit. So before it was a very smooth style, I'm now actually going to mix it up a bit, and we'll just create some more interesting terrain on the right hand side. So here we go. And you'll see here now that I'm just very roughly doing stuff with the brush, mixing up the color, and already you can see we have these interesting objects that come into play, and we're not sure what they are, but often with nature you don't always know what everything is. So that also then helps to build up this foreground, and then in the background we have that smooth hill. And then here we'll just put in some more, and then you'll see now that our pathway is less structured than it was. And maybe what we want to do is just kind of make that a little bit more discernible as a pathway. So what I'm going to do is just mix in a bit of white here, and now I'm just going to make it less of a huge path and turn it more into a little path. And I'm actually going to use smaller strokes. So I'm using this smaller brush and just letting that. Right, so that's creating some interest there in our path, and then on the right we'll just do a bit of that, and then go back in with the highlighted color again. Right, so by changing the angle of the brush, and you can create all these interesting little bits. And then if you wanted to create the impression that, let's say, we had some long grasses coming into play here, then what you can do is taking a much finer brush and mixing that up with the highlighted color. You could just, now I'm doing this with a fine brush. You could also do it with a very wide brush. There's another technique you could use for that. So that just gives the impression, and you don't have to do it to a lot. You just do a couple of pieces, and it doesn't have to be too defined. And that just creates this impression that maybe there's some some grass or something growing here in the foreground. And then on the left hand side, what you might want to do then is the reverse, and just indicate maybe just the tips of some of the grass is highlighted. And you'll see that what we've managed to do here on the left is create some foreground, which is a lot higher than the background. So it's almost like we're looking down into this valley. And what these highlights will do now that we're putting in is it'll just create detail in the foreground, and just the fact that maybe the background there's less detail. So that there would be then right. So now on the left you have the grass, you then have this hill in the background. Here we have our pathway heading down, and then of course on the pathway what's not working is it wouldn't have sun all the way across it. So there would be places where the sun would cover it, the shadow would cover it completely. So you want to just mix that up. Right, so here's our pathway then. You can head down this path, and what I am going to do then, just let's call it some interesting color here, is just also show areas where this will just help to guide the eye as to where the path is. So that's the pathway going down, and you'll see that as you build color, so it gets more interesting. And also, if you wanted to create the impression of uneven ground, then just put in some brush strokes that are at a slightly different angle to the norm, and that will help to create those areas of interest, and then also add the dark, or sometimes you can just put in the dark and that will do the same thing. So yeah, I think that's kind of our pathway here. We've got some nice grasses here. On the right hand side though, the highlights stop a little bit low, so what we need to do is, you know, just because there'd be more sun on this side, so we do need to maybe do a bit more on this side, and you'll see that we're not following any particular angle, we just do it in all directions. And as we go, you'll see that that will start to build the color, and you'll see I've added a little bit of red in there, so we don't want to have everything too much the same color. Yeah, so there on the right hand side we have our grasses. On the left hand side we have some grasses being highlighted, and now I'm just taking this bigger brush and I just want to blur some of the grass so it doesn't look so, like, you don't really want to wreck it, but there you go. So you'll see the kind of effect that we can build in using a bigger brush to do the same thing that I was doing with the little brush. So a little bit lighter on the right hand side, some nice highlights, and then over here we just want to break that. So and also we want to just indicate the road. Right, so we just don't want any particularly solid line on the right hand side, and then we just want to create the impression. Right, so there we have our pathway, the road, and then almost done here on the right. We're just going to add a little bit of dark, because we have, you know, everything is looking, you know, the same color, which creates flat, and flat means it's further away. And so I'm just putting in some dark here, and then should maybe wait for that to dry, but being a bit of an impatient guy. Right, so you'll see that by adding, you know, the lights and the darks and the interesting, you know, you start to build up this really interesting set of grasses here, and it's not just one thing, it's a couple of things, and that's what you ultimately, you know, you want to do, because that's going to be interesting for the eye. And then as you move away, that gets flatter until, you know, it's super flat on the top of the hill. And one way to do that is to introduce more white, and then go with a flatter texture. So there you have the the top hill, and what we'll do is we're just going to add that highlight there. Great. So that then indicates that the hill moves up on the right hand side, and we're just going to put some more highlight in there. Okay, so there we have the hill on the right hand side, nice bit of sun hitting it, and then there we had the trees, and now all that we need to do in the background there where all those trees are is put some houses. So let's go with our white, and it can literally just be, you know, it's just a house, and a house at this distance would literally just be some brush strokes. So there we have some houses in the background, and we're just going to give them a colored roof. Now the straight lines will indicate a man-made structure, so it's pretty easy to create the impression of the house. And then of course the other thing that we must remember is that the houses at the moment are all very flat, and they have nothing growing in their gardens, so we must just put something maybe to break some of the line, and you'll see it's very subtle. And it doesn't detract from the fact that they're houses, but it just kind of, in a way, it might add a bit. And if you want to, in some of the instances, you might get away with just adding, you know, and wild red is always the chosen color for a house roof. Well, I guess it doesn't have to be, but that seems to be the often the accepted norm. Yeah, so there we have our town coming along. Okay, so if you were doing that, you could see if that's starting to make sense to you. And sometimes these paintings do tend to go on a bit longer than hoped. And now I'm just going to add some popping color. So this is medium yellow with a bit of white, and I just wanted to, you know, add the sunshine, which it deserves. And so there you go. There we have some grasses here, and then let's we'll just bring that into the landscape a bit, mix that up with a bit of blue, create this green, and you know, kind of have that stretching back here. Right, so, and you can see that as you go, you can, you know, you can keep building layers and layers of color and interest as much as you like. There's really no limit, and it's really up to you to decide when to stop. So That's our little drawing there. Just one other thing that you could do, and that's if you really wanted to create something, or just create, carry on with that town thing. And maybe in our town over here we have a church, so we're just going to add a taller structure, and of course the highlight will come in from the right, from the left. And right, so that would then be the basis for our church. And maybe that has a bell tower on top. So if it does have the bell tower, then it would need something square. And then on top of that, you would have a roof. So really up to you how much fun you want to have with your with a bell tower, but could be something along those lines. Maybe not the best looking bell tower in the world of bell towers. No, in fact, we'll take out the bell tower. That didn't work. Okay, but that's just to give you an idea of what you can do in terms of a pathway and heading into this town. And here we have the pathway, we have some trees, we have a nice landscape background, we have some houses, there's a town, and then there in the background you have some hills. So a very basic exercise, and maybe with a bit of time it could be more interesting. The idea to put the fence on didn't really pan out in the end. So I hope you enjoyed that. Thank you for watching.